Hi class, it's Bill Berry and we're going to resume our talk about multi-table queries. The first video covered some introductory material so that we would understand what the lay of the land was, what is a join, and why do we need to do it. So now we're going to pick up with some specifics about certain kinds of joins and then how to write them in SQL. So let's jump back into that. So we have our join hierarchy that we're going to use, and here is our first major topic, and that is the inner query. What is an inner query? How does it work? How do you write it in SQL? Let's go back to our donations and member example. So an inner query brings together data that matches. That is the key thing that we're looking here, is that only data that has a mate in the matching, right, is going to be retrieved. So in this case, you'll notice that we have some members and we have some donations, but we have this member down here, Dana or Dana Smith, and then we have this donation down here. Neither of these things seem to have any corresponding data. It doesn't look like Dana has given any donations, so Dana is a deadbeat, I guess. So we have no Dana here, and then I don't know what this member ID is here. Probably shouldn't be here. It seems like a mistake. So we have this odd member ID over here, and it doesn't have a corresponding member. That should not have happened, right? It's okay for a member not to have given any donations, but this seems like a plain error. But let's ignore that for the moment. The idea of an inner join is it's going to match data from the two tables, and it's only going to bring down the data that matches. So you'll notice here, if we have our Dana Smith, notice that Dana will not participate in this because there is no member ID over here corresponding. So Dana will be ignored in an inner join. By the same token, in this case, there is no join, there is no member ID with a 52 over here in the other table. So therefore, this donation, whatever weird reason it came to be, is not going to be in the result. So an inner join brings together only matching data. So these folks are affected and these donations are affected because they have corresponding data in both tables. Perfect. They're going to show up. That is the definition of an inner join. Now let's look at a little example database. You don't have this database or shouldn't have this database because this is one that we're going to create later when we learn about creating databases from scratch. But you can get the idea here. We have a customer table and a pet table, and then we are going to have a many-to-many relationship. Therefore, we have this linking table called customer pet. Why is it many to many? Well, sometimes pets get returned. They don't have a good adoption scenario, so they may come back and be adopted by somebody else. So one pet could be adopted many times over the course of time. So that's why we have a many to many. There's some sample data here, and so we don't really need to understand it a lot, but that's the basics here of what's going on. Now we may have something like this. If so, remember to pay attention when you're working with these scenarios. Remember that here we have a primary key, and that's going to link to the data that's here in the linking table. Then over here we have the pet ID, that's the primary key over here, and that's going to link to the data that is right here. We have to make sure that we understand those linkages when we're working with multiple tables and doing a join. So let's look at how we might start into the writing of a join. So again, remember that it's the data here. It's not just the fact that the foreign key exists that makes the join possible. It's this data, right? So we have some data in customer pet that represent those adoptions. Without the data, you can't do a join because there's no data to join. All right, so what is an inner join, and then how do we write one? Well, we talked about this. Here's a little illustration of it using a Venn diagram, and so here's some examples of what you might want to do. I want a list of invoices and their associated vendors, right? So that's just a little illustration. Let's go on and talk about how to write an inner join, and let's focus first on the on syntax, right? So one way to do inner joins is with the on syntax. So let's look at how to do that. You're going to, when you do that, you're going to say select, and you're going to give a select list, as always. What columns do you want to see out? But notice here we're going to say from table 1 as before, but then we're going to either optionally say inner, or for sure we're going to say join, and then we're going to describe the second table that we're going to join it to, right? So table 1, join table 2. And this is a super important part in that we are going to always need to give an join condition. If you don't give a join condition, then the data is going to be brought together willy-nilly, and that's never a good thing, or rarely a good thing. So certainly you don't want to forget this part, right? So this is the syntax that we're going to use, and again, we're focusing here on on. All right, and the join conditions are typically going to look like this, and they're going to need qualification in many kinds of cases. Don't forget you can use the table and then a dot and then a column to qualify a particular thing. So notice that if we put this in the context of our full select syntax, this is where we would add the part that we're adding this week. The rest looks familiar, but this is a new part. All right, so just to be super clear, anything that's in the select clause or the where clause or the order by can now draw data from two tables, right? You used to be able to only use stuff from one here, but now we can use two. Don't forget also that the join condition should focus on primary key and foreign key columns, right? That's just part of the deal here. If you're not joining on foreign and primary keys, that's kind of suspicious. Usually it's an error. So now let's go back and see how to actually write one of these things. We want to get a list of pets by name and when they were adopted. So the first thing we want to do is identify what tables we need to work with. Do we need the pet table? Yes, because that's where the pet name exists, so we're going to certainly need that table. Do we need the customer table? No, it just asks for when the pet was adopted. It doesn't have anything to do with the customer table, so for the moment we don't need to worry about the customer table. But then when they were adopted, well, the adoption date is here in this table, so we're going to certainly need that table. So the first thing to figure out is where exactly is the data coming from? So we know that it's coming from the pet table and the customer pet table, right? So how do we write this? Well, let me bring up a notepad window so we can actually do a little bit of writing here. Okay, so let me just make it a little shorter. Here we go. All right, so the first thing we're going to say is select, and it asks for the pets by name. So obviously we're going to say pet name, right? That name is not ambiguous, so we can just say pet name. And then when they were adopted, let's see, that's adoption date. Again, not ambiguous, so we don't need to qualify it. Now we could, if we want to be like super clear for some reason, you could say pet.pet name and customer pet.adoption date. You can always qualify if you like, but it's not required here. All right, it's not required at all. Now we have to say from, and whereas before we just had one table, now we're going to have two. Which one do we start with? Doesn't matter, right? Does not matter. Pick the one that you think makes best sense, and then move in the direction towards the other or others, as we'll learn later. I'm going to start with pet, but you don't have to, right? It's going to work the same either way. Then we can say optionally inner, but certainly we have to say join, right? Join is required. So I'm just going to say join, and then I'm going to say customer pet. So notice here we're going to have the name of the two tables that are going to be involved, which we have. If we stop here, we're going to be in trouble because without a join condition, it's going to do what's called a cross join, which we'll learn about later, which will bring together a lot of data in an unrelated way, and that's going to be a mess. So we need to continue on, and what we understand now is to use on. Right? So what do we join on? What is the join condition? Well, we already pointed out the fact that here is the primary key from here. Right? Here is the foreign key from here. So again, 99% of the time, that's how you're going to join these two tables. And in fact, that's the only way that makes sense to join these two tables is to match up the pet IDs. So how do we do that? We can say pet.petID equals customer pet.petID. Now, do I have to type customer dot and pet dot in this case? Yes, you absolutely do. Because if you try to do this, SQL will say, I don't understand what you mean because this is an ambiguous column name. So you've got to qualify it, even though you could say, well, it doesn't really matter which one it pulls it from. Well, it's not going to make any, draw any conclusions or make any inferences or deductions. It's not going to do anything helpful with that except say, hey, it's ambiguous, try again. Now, which order you put them in doesn't matter at all. Right? You could switch the order of customer dot and pet dot. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever, right? So that's how we're going to do this, and unless we need to filter it in some way, that's going to be the way we write that query. So if I now jump over to my SQL Workbench, I can double click that. I can make sure I say use pet adoption execute that command. Now I can paste in my query. I can execute my query, and let's see what known customer.pet, oh sorry, customer pet.pet ID, of course. And now we're going to run that, and there is our adoption results. Fluffy was adopted that date, Lucky was adopted that date. Does that make sense? So that is the way to join data from two tables using the on clause, right? We're using on syntax for this particular thing. And notice when you're using that, if you have the same column name in both tables, you've got to qualify them both. We didn't have to qualify these because they're not ambiguous. Now, if the line gets long, you can certainly wrap this, but if you did, I would do it this way. If I had to wrap these, I would tend to wrap them this way, because join is subordinate to the from clause, and on is actually subordinate to the join clause. It's part of the join. So if you have to wrap, be careful and don't make sure that it's super clear to the readers what's going on. But in this case, that will probably do just fine. So when we come back here, obviously we forgot this needs to be customer pet. My fault. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense about how to write a simple inner join using the on clause. Now we're going to, I'll show you the result of that. So here it is on a slide if you want to grab it, and you can stop the video at this point if you want to take a look at that. All right, so remember again that an inner join will show that only adopted pets are going to be shown. So there's no listing here for any pets that aren't adopted. That's the nature of an inner join. If you want to see different results than that, you got to learn a different kind of join. Now there's going to be some practice. We won't stop and do that here, but if you want to, you can certainly stop and see if you can accomplish this. And in class, we'll do that together, and then we will, we'll move on and look at the results of that. But we won't do that here in the video. So next thing we're going to do is talk about different kinds of ways that you can join rather than using on. Right? We're going to look at different kinds of inner join syntax. But we'll pause the video, stop the video here, as it's already getting more than 10 minutes, and then we'll pick up with using in just a moment in the next video. So thanks for watching this one.